All right. Hi, everybody that's there. Just logging in here. Wanted to talk to you guys today a little bit about the assignment that I've given you guys. All right. So, who is logged in? Just give me a little message. Tell me who you are. Just want to see what's up. All right. And if you guys have any questions, just post them on the chat here. We're going to look and see what you guys got. Try to answer as much as I can for you guys about the Bible. Just logging in here right now myself to the chat. All right. So, how's it going, Chi? How many original posts so how many, whoa. That just all kind of came by really quickly. Original posts. So basically, you're going to make an original post. We're going to have at least one of these every week. So I'm going to have one for you guys every week. And I think there's going to be an additional one of these posts for Chapel. I'm not in charge of Chapel. So I don't know exactly what the deal is with Chapel. So we'll kind of see that as we go. Okay. But for Bible class, we're going to have one post that you guys are going to have to write per week. Okay, and that's going to be a variety of different things. Today, if you have noticed, I already put the post up for you guys this week. I'm going to make that due like Friday or something like that. I think that's probably a pretty good, that gives you several days to think about it and to write about it. But the post that I'm going to have you guys is going to be due on Friday. And you're basically, let me just, give me a second here. I'm trying to close out a couple things here. And my computer wants to update everything. Let me see. Are we required to reply to other people's posts? Good question. You are, but not right now. Okay. So for this initial post, you don't have to reply to anybody's post. I will tell you exactly what you'll have to do. Okay. So for the initial post, you just need to write down your response to my prompt, and that's it. Let me see. Just give me a sec here so I can see everything. Okay. And here we are. Okay. All right. So I see everything. So I see Chi and Annie are here. Great. Lots of comments. Except they're like all kind of the same. Okay. How many original posts? I think I just said that. So you're gonna do one per week, and then Chapel. So maybe Chapel. So Chapel. I don't know. I think that might be one per week, and maybe less. And I don't know exactly the format. Last time it was basically just some kind of questionnaire that Mr. Person made up of, what kind of haircut to give him and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not exactly sure what is going to be in the coming weeks and all that kind of stuff. But who knows what that's going to be for Chapel. So that will be actually the Chapel ones will be part of our grade in addition to the Bible ones. But the Bible ones are going to be a little bit more consistent with what we're doing. Okay, so I want to talk mainly today about what that Bible post that I require you guys to do this week. And so let's just dive right into that. All right. So for this week, I've already posted it. We are going to be talking about those four groups, the four Jewish sects, if you will, or groups. And I don't want to just call them religious groups because they weren't all religious groups that were at the time of Jesus. Okay. And so back up here, are you required to reply to other people's posts? So like I said, this week you are not. In the future, I will tell you when you are required to reply to someone else's post or not. Okay. So for this week, is just you doing this post, and that's it. Nothing else. Okay. So you're gonna do a post and write down what you think, and you may read other people's posts, but you don't actually have to reply to anybody's post. You may, if you want, but you don't have to. Okay. Eventually, you will be required to reply to someone else's post. But that's going to be later on. Okay. And so let me just adjust this back to the top. So one post per week or a response to someone else. All right. But I will tell you when you're supposed to do that. This week, everybody is going to respond to my prompt, and that is this one right here. Okay. So no requirement to reply to someone else's prompt this week or to reply to someone else's comment this week. Okay. So for this week, all you're going to do is reply to my post. All right. And that's this. Okay. There are four Jewish groups, essentially, more or less, four main Jewish groups at the time of Jesus. And they're not all religious groups. Some of them are religious, some of them aren't so religious. And I want you to determine or to decide which one that you like the best, or which one would you be. Okay, so if you were living at the time of Jesus, which group would you belong to? Now, I know that not everybody in the world would necessarily belong to one of those groups, okay? But I want you to pick one. You can't say none. You can't say, oh, I wouldn't belong to any of those groups. That is not an option. You must choose one of those four groups, okay? You must choose one of those four groups. You cannot just say, oh, I don't like any of them and I'm not going to be part of one of them, all right? So you must choose one of those four groups and you must explain why, okay? My requirements are not, at least in my opinion, are not too big. And those requirements are, I want you to write at least 100 words. 100 words is about a paragraph, okay? So one paragraph, and some people's paragraphs are longer than others, so I suggest you put this into a something like Word, and then you can copy it back over to Google Classroom, and you want to count the words, all right? So there's a word count in Word, right? Count your words and make sure that it's not too short. All right, no, if you're at 98 words or 99 words, that's okay. But, if you're coming down with only 75 words, you're not putting enough into this, okay? So I want you to choose one of those four groups and tell me why and explain all the details of that group and how you like that group, or maybe how you don't like other groups or something like that. That's fine. You can say, I don't like these other groups because, and that's fine, okay? But you got to choose one of those groups and you got to say why you belong to it and be specific to you, okay? Let's see. So be specific, right? About you and about the group. All right. And think about this. I want you to really get in the head of somebody at the time of Jesus. I mean, we haven't read through the entire book of Matthew yet, and that's okay. We've already done some background. So I do expect you guys to know a little bit about this, but you're not going to be perfect in terms of understanding what people exactly were thinking back then. But I want you to try as best as possible to get in the head of somebody at the time of Jesus 2,000 years ago and try to think like they're thinking and try to say, okay, how would I respond to this? So let's break it down. And we've talked about this in class. We spent basically an entire class period a couple weeks ago talking about the four different groups. But let me go over it again to make sure that we're all getting it, and so that you can remember what those four groups are. Okay? So let's just jump right into talking about the four groups. And the four groups are going to be starting with the Zealots. All right, Zealots, they're not a religious group. Now, remember, a big thing that's going on at this time is that the people of Israel were relating to foreigners all the time. They had war or were attacked by foreigners all the time. And those foreigners included a number of different groups. And let me just go ahead and list some of them for you, right? So foreign powers were a big problem. All right. So starting off with Egypt, right? Egypt was very powerful, but they honestly weren't so terribly bad. But they they interacted with Israel, and sometimes they would attack and all that kind of stuff. But they were very powerful. They were more powerful than the Israelites and the Jewish people. Then you have the Assyrians. And the Assyrians were brutal. They just wiped out, they just killed everybody, right? So they are just all about killing people, and then they also took people out. So they just transplanted people. They took people out of Israel and they implanted people in. And so they were deporting or importing or deporting people. Okay? And then you have the Babylon, or the Babylonians, and they were pretty comparable to the Assyrians. Maybe not quite as brutal, but it's exactly the same kind of thing. They completely destroyed Jerusalem. And they also were deporting people too. So by deporting, I mean that they were taking people from Israel and sending them off to somewhere else, sending them off to Babylon or sending them off to somebody somewhere else. Okay, and the idea was that when Babylon or Assyria did this, that they would have better control over that land, because they would people would no longer be connected to a particular land. They would now be somewhere else, disconnected to their heritage, disconnected to their land, disconnected to their language, and in effect become part of Babylon or become part of Assyria. But it didn't completely work, because Babylon and Assyria were defeated eventually. Right? Assyria was defeated by Babylon, and Babylon was defeated by Persia. And the Persian Empire was nice. The Persian Empire let them go back. So the Persians, they let the Jewish people go home. And they're probably the nicest people or the nicest large country or powerful country that were the nicest to Israel. They basically let them go home, and they just had to pledge allegiance to the Persians, and that's about it. They maybe paid a little bit in terms of taxes, but that's about it. Right? The Persians were pretty much nice to them. But then the Persians lost, so everybody's losing, right? The Persians eventually lost to Greece. And Greece was also brutal. They weren't so much about killing people as much as, let's say, the Assyrians were, but Greece was very much in terms of controlling people and controlling their culture, right? And so they forced the religion of Greece. They forced also the language and culture of Greece on everybody else. All right, and we remember, and you've got this in the timeline. You remember you've got Antiochus Epiphanes that actually caused them or made them to sacrifice to idols, made them eat pork, made them worship these idols, made them stop their circumcision, and all this, basically all the different things that made them Jewish. They forced them to stop doing that and to do other things. Okay, and so Greece, they were particularly bad to the Jewish people. Okay, but again, eventually Greece, the Israel itself defeated Greece, kicked them out, but eventually Rome took over. And at the time of Jesus, right? So at the time of Jesus, Rome is the one that's in power. Okay, Rome, again, they were not as bad as the Greeks. Okay, the Rome was a little bit nicer. They did the main thing. So they had Roman law, right? So they imposed the Roman law. They had a lot of taxes. This is probably the biggest thing that they did. They imposed their taxes, but mostly Rome gave them a fair amount of freedom. Okay, and so the Jewish people could believe what they wanted to believe. They could practice the religion as they wanted. They could speak their language. Although there were some advantages to speaking, let's say, Latin, and there were some advantages to following the Roman way. The main things that Rome imposed were law and taxes. And so otherwise, Rome was nicer to the Israelites than Greeks. But even so, the people, you can imagine, the Jewish people are really, really tired of being controlled by these foreign powers, right? We've got Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, all these foreign powers that are coming in, attacking them, taking their stuff, taking their people, forcing them to do different things that they don't want to do, and essentially controlling them. And so the people of Israel, the Jewish people, are tired of that. All right. And so the Zealots, how did they respond? The Zealots were just so tired of that and said that we are going to fight. All right. So the Zealots were fighters and they hated the foreigners. Not necessarily all foreigners, but especially the foreigners, the powerful foreigners, right? The ones that were controlling them, right? They hated the foreign rulers. So, and they probably hated foreigners in general. But if you were some other foreigner at that time, they're not going to hate you nearly as much as they're going to hate Rome, right? They hated Rome, not simply not because there was something about Rome that they hated Rome because Rome was in charge, and they did not want to have a foreign power over them. Right? They wanted to be in charge, and so what did they want to do? They wanted to kick their main goal for everything was to kick out Rome or any other foreigners and to take control of Israel. Okay? And so the Zealots, if you want to get a good picture of who the Zealots really were the Maccabees, right? So the Maccabees who defeated Greece a long time ago, those were the same people that were the Zealots, the same way of thinking. The Maccabees, they hated Greece for taking over Israel and forcing their religion on them. So the Maccabees fought back, and the Maccabees won. Remember, the Maccabees, they defeated Greece. Okay? And so the Zealots are essentially the same group as the Maccabees, and they want to fight back, and they're thinking if the Maccabees defeated Greece, we can defeat Rome. And eventually, actually, in about 66 AD, so this is about 33 years after Jesus died and resurrected. So after Jesus' crucifixion, these zealots actually fought against Rome, right? And the battle was really, really fierce. Right? It's a war. It raged on for 4, even more years. The main war ended in 70 AD, right? And so in 70 AD, Rome utterly destroyed Israel. They completely wiped out. They destroyed. They destroyed the temple that Herod had built, and they did all that kind of stuff. So in 70 AD, the Rome destroyed Jerusalem once again, right? And completely subjugated the Jewish people. All right. And this was not an easy fight for Rome. Actually, you think Rome is so powerful, but this was not an easy fight for them. Okay. It lasted 4 years. And the Roman general who defeated Israel actually became emperor later on. And he was so proud of this accomplishment that on a coin that he minted, he basically wrote that he was the conqueror of Israel. So this was not a little war. It was a big deal for not only Israel, but it was also a big deal for Rome. Okay, and so this was a pretty, this Zealots, even though we're talking about a little tiny country of Israel, these Zealots managed to have a very powerful army at the time of about 30 some years after Jesus. Okay, so they're a pretty big group. And after Jesus is crucified and resurrected, the Zealots become perhaps the most powerful group within Israel. Okay, they are fighters and they hate the foreigners. They hate Rome because they want power. They want to get Rome out. And in fact, 30 some years after Jesus, they fought against Rome and they lost. But they put up a really, really good fight in the process, and they lost. Okay? So that's the Zealots. The Zealots were fighters. They weren't really a religious group. All right. So next up, you have the Pharisees. Let's make Pharisees. Let's do black. Okay. We have the Pharisees. All right. And the Pharisees are actually the group that Jesus interacts the most with in the Bible. So when you read the Bible and you see Jesus talking to the Pharisees, this is the group. So they're a pretty important group in the Bible, and it's a pretty important group for you to understand. Right. At the time of Jesus, so like I said, after Jesus had died and resurrected, the Zealots were probably the most important group or most influential group. But in Jesus' time, so 30 years earlier, at Jesus' time, this was the most popular group. Okay? Most popular group. And so that's probably why Jesus interacted with them so much, because the Pharisees were liked by most of the people, right? You know, the normal people, they liked Pharisees. They agreed with Pharisees. So most of the people were, pro-Pharisee. That was kind of the most popular group, right? Now, let me see here. The the Pharisee itself, the word Pharisee, it actually means separate. Right? So separate. What does that mean? So basically, the Pharisee, the idea of Pharisee is that they're separate from the world. They're separate from other people. So it's kind of to emphasize they're not like the rest of the world. Okay? Specifically, they're not like foreigners. They're not like Rome. Okay? So they're different. They're separate. All right? And they want to emphasize their separateness. Okay? So they're not like Rome. All right? And so this group, the Pharisees, like the Zealots, they were anti-foreigner. They didn't like foreigners, especially they didn't like Rome. Okay? But they're not fighters. Okay? They're not fighters. Okay. So let me see. When does it due? For the post in the class comment, this is going to be due on Friday. Okay? How's that sound? I think that should be good. Okay? It's only one paragraph, 100 words. Okay? So this is going to be due on Friday. All right? So the Pharisees, they're not fighters. So who are they? They're a religious group. All right? So they wanted to address their distinctness, their Jewishness in a religious way rather than in terms of military. They didn't want to fight. Okay? They were not about fighting people. Okay? So they're not a political group, but they were a religious group. Okay? And so their idea of separateness was this, that they wanted to, so if you want to get a gist of who were the Pharisees kind of in a nutshell, they wanted to emphasize their distinctive features as being Jewish. So remember, the Greeks were trying to remove all of their Jewish practices, and as a response, the Pharisees wanted to emphasize all of their distinctiveness. They wanted to emphasize all that, and so that's going to be especially the outward religious practices and the things that made them different. Okay. So the Pharisees believed in the whole Bible, at least the whole Old Testament. They believed in God. They believed in a lot of the stuff that Jesus talked about, but they had a different emphasis. And it's this emphasis that really makes the Pharisees a lot different from Jesus. Okay? So what do I mean by that? Okay, so the Pharisees, right, they believed in things like love, and justice, right? And mercy, right? They believed in all of those things just like Jesus did. But what's the deal about love, justice, and mercy? They're not distinctly Jewish and they're not very outward. Okay? They're more of things, these are to do with the heart. And so because of these, because they had more to do with the heart, they didn't emphasize those. Although they believed in these things, they didn't really care about them that much. All right? They didn't emphasize those things. So what did they emphasize? Right? They emphasized the things that made them distinctly Jewish, the things that were different from other people. And those things are going to be what? They're going to be, so their emphasis was going to be what? Is going to be their the Sabbath, because that was distinctly Jewish. The dietary restrictions. So, for example, they couldn't eat pig, they couldn't eat pork, right? They couldn't eat various different things like that. Their circumcision, right? These kinds of things were outward. They were noticeable, especially things like the Sabbath is going to come into play a whole lot of not doing work on the seventh day, right? So that's going to be huge. And also their dietary restrictions. Circumcision is also important, but is not as obvious for obvious reasons. And so you're not going to see as much talk about circumcision. It's going to be mostly geared towards Sabbath and diet, right? And so these things, right, are all outward, right? Their religious practices were, various different things that were outward, and they were distinct for the Jewish people. And so that's why the Pharisees emphasized them, not because the Pharisees didn't believe in these other things. They didn't, the Pharisees did care about them, but they didn't emphasize them. Instead, they emphasized these outward appearances. Okay. So, so over here, Mr. Ketz, can you can the notes and upload to Google Classroom? You mean you want me to scan the notes? No, I can't, because I can't go to school. The school got shut down yesterday, and I don't have a scanner at home. So I'm sorry. But you have the YouTube video. You're welcome to pause it at any point, and you're welcome to rewatch it. The YouTube video will always be up there, and so you guys can just go ahead and do that. I mean, I could take a picture. It's not going to be very good quality. If you want me to just take a picture and upload them, I can, but I don't have a scanner. Okay? So, if you want at the end, I'll just take a picture of these if that would help. Yeah, photo. I can do a photo. No problem. Okay. So, last of all, let's just finish up these Pharisees here before we go on to another one. In addition to this, one thing that I haven't mentioned before, which is going to be, which is you're going to see in the Bible a little bit, is something known as the oral tradition. Oral tradition. Okay? So the Pharisees, the group of the Pharisees started something around 100 years or so before Jesus, or maybe even longer. I'm not exactly sure exactly when they started. I don't know the very, very first Pharisee to come on the scenes, but I'm going to say at least 100 years before Jesus. And from that point in time, they started to... Okay, I don't know. I think I got disconnected there. Is anybody still with me? I'm not sure at what point I went out. So I was adding some stuff on here. Unfortunately, looks like I got disconnected. Apparently, with this whole coronavirus deal, there's a whole lot of people going on doing online teaching, and even Google is being kind of like just stretching their limits in terms of this. And so my bandwidth has been restricted, and sometimes we have a little bit of this problem in terms of disconnecting. Anyway, so I don't know at what point we clicked out, but let me re-summarize kind of what's going on with this oral tradition. Oral tradition is something that the Pharisees kind of made up about 100 years or so before Jesus, and there is literally a whole bunch of these Pharisees arguing and discussing details of the Bible, okay? So, once again, for example, the Bible says you need to rest once a week. On the seventh day, you need to rest. You can't do any ordinary work, okay? And so that's it. That's all the Bible says. So the oral tradition is saying, okay, well, what does it mean? What does it mean to do no work? And so they came up with a whole bunch of extra laws, a whole bunch of extra sayings, okay? So extra laws to say exactly what it means to do no work. And so they would say, for example, you can't walk any more than a certain distance, and you can't do this, you can't do that. A whole bunch of little detailed laws to answer questions about, um, for example, what does it mean to not do work on the Sabbath? Okay. And same kind of things with diet restrictions and all that. But a lot of these laws and traditions had to do with the Sabbath. Okay. And so Jesus and the Pharisees disagreed about that. Jesus agreed with the Sabbath, but he disagreed with this whole extra Mishnah, the laws and traditions they added, because these were too strict, and they were so strict that they sometimes excluded things like love, justice, and mercy. Remember, the Pharisees are going to emphasize the outward appearance. They're going to emphasize the outward appearance of doing things. And so in the process, they forget about love, justice, and mercy. And they have all these strict laws to do that. Now, we can go ahead and blame the Pharisees for this, but you have to remember why did they do this? They did this because, let me just see if I can fit this in here, because of those foreign powers, right? They were really addressing the issue of foreign powers like Rome and Greece that were coming in there and telling them what they could and couldn't do. Okay. And so they wanted to emphasize their outward beliefs, and they wanted to not just say, don't do work on the Sabbath, but they wanted to also explain in detail of what all that meant. Okay. So those are the Pharisees. I probably took the most time to talk about the Pharisees because they're probably the most important. All right. Because they're the group that Jesus interacts with the most. Okay? So, let me see if there's anything else I missed about them. Yeah, that's pretty good for the Pharisees. All right, let's talk about next up. Let's do the Sadducees and the Zealots. And I think we can do them both on maybe one piece of paper here. Okay? So you have the Sadducees. Group 3. I can never spell these things. Sadducees. I don't know. I'm not sure which letters doubled. Maybe there's 2 C's in there, something like that. Or maybe 1 D. Anyway, so the Sadducees is a group that responded a little bit differently than the Pharisees and the Zealots. Okay? So they were okay with Rome. They were okay with the foreigners, okay? They compromised with them. And in response, the Sadducees had the most power of all these groups. Okay? Now, in real honesty, the Sadducees were not liked by the people. These were probably the least popular group. I'm sure some people like the Sadducees, but for the most part, the Sadducees were going to be the least popular group. They were the group that supported Rome for the most part, and a lot of people didn't like them because of that. But the Sadducees themselves were not entirely a political group. I mean, they were partially a political group, but they were not entirely a political group. Okay? And so to understand that, we need to get to, what does Sadducee mean? Okay? Sadducee itself literally means just or righteous. All right? The term Sadducee, which comes from Saduk, which is a Hebrew word that was also often used for priest, it means just or righteous. So the Sadducees saw themselves as good people. They weren't entirely a political group. They also were a religious group, right? And so they did believe in God. Okay? But they, like Jesus, they did not believe in the oral tradition. They completely rejected the oral tradition. They rejected the Mishnah. Okay? So in that respect, they agreed with Jesus. Okay? But they had a lot of different things that they taught. For example, they didn't believe in a resurrection. They did believe in God, but they did not believe in a bodily resurrection. And it's a little bit unclear exactly what that meant. So maybe they thought that when you die, you just die, or maybe they and more likely they agreed more with the Romans. Remember, they had some influence by Rome, and Rome had this understanding of after you die, you go to some afterlife, but the afterlife doesn't actually involve a bodily resurrection. It's more like, um, you know, you have some kind of existence in Hades or what have you, but you don't actually have a bodily resurrection. Okay, so it's a little bit unclear exactly what the Sadducees believed in, but likely they were kind of a combination of the Jewish belief in God with some influence by Rome and Greece. Okay, because these people, they were rich and they were powerful, right? And they were influenced and friends with the Roman rulers at the time. Okay. Um, so in addition to that, being influenced, so they were influenced greatly by Rome and Greek thought. Okay. And so you'll see some kind of combination between the Jewish belief in God and the Greek and Roman belief in God. And you'll see some kind of blending of the two in the Sadducees. Okay. These guys, they were the priests, right? So because they were powerful, they became the priests, and the priests had positions of power. The priests were not merely religious people, but the priests themselves, they were political. They were both religious and political at the same time. Okay, and so there were kind of positions of power there. Okay, so that's the Sadducees. All right, um, and kind of an interesting group. Last of all, we have the Essenes. And the Essenes were kind of really like the monks at the time. All right, so they kind of withdrew from society, and they lived out, just in the desert. They lived in communities, so they weren't monks in the sense that they lived all by themselves, but they lived together as a community. And within their Essene communities, they shared a lot. They had a lot of similarities to the early Christians, right? The early Christians were living in communities and sharing things with each other. The Essenes did the same thing, right? They shared things with each other. They took care of each other. They were really a group that was community based. Now the Essenes themselves, they although they were communities, they really were not interacting with the world at large. So like the Zealots and like the Pharisees, they kind of got away from the foreigners, right? So they did not like the foreign rule. The only people that liked the foreign rule really were the Sadducees, okay? And the only reason the Sadducees liked the foreign rule is because the foreigners gave them power. The Essenes, the Zealots, the Pharisees, none of them liked the foreign rule. They just responded differently, right? The Zealots wanted to fight back. The Pharisees just emphasized their distinctive religiousness, and the Essenes kind of escaped. They ran away. They didn't like the foreign rule, so they went away and they lived all by themselves in the middle of nowhere, and they withdrew from society. Okay, so we don't know actually a whole lot about them. Most of them, not I don't think all of them, but most of them lived like kind of in a desert area by the Dead Sea. But in that area, there's also some places, some oases, or where they could grow some some different things to eat, and so they were kind of self-sustaining in that respect. Okay, now these Essenes, interestingly, they also they were very religious in nature, and so they believed in God, right? And they loved the Bible, and they were very very good at copying the Bible. So they right, and actually, our oldest copies of the Bible come from them. Okay, you may have heard about that before, and I think we even discussed it before. So um, they were living by the Dead Sea, and they produced the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? And so these Essenes, they had been living there as many as, or even more than, 200 years before Jesus. So these Dead Sea Scrolls, they date back to, the earliest ones date back to 200 BC. That's 200 years before Christ, or 200 years before Jesus. Okay, so the Essenes are not responding to Rome. The Essenes are responding to Greece. Okay, so back when Greece was in power, the Essenes were kind of withdrawing already. Okay, so the Essenes were there at the time of Jesus, and they're there before Jesus. Okay, and so they, at the time of Greece, they were running away from the Greeks, and they were trying to find their own little society away from Greece. And so that really makes a lot more sense, right, when you think about it, because the Romans weren't forcing the religion on them, but the Greeks were. And so the Essenes ran away from the Greeks. They formed their own communities outside of society, and within that, they were copying the Bible. And we have our earliest copies of the Bible from the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Very, very good copies of the Dead Sea Scroll. Very, very good copies of the Bible. And I've seen copies of these myself. They're stored in Israel. If you go to the museum in Israel, you can see them. Really, really cool looking. The documents are over 2,200 years old, and you can see original copies, or very, very early copies of the Bible in full form, right? Entire books in the Bible, not just little scraps, but entire books of the Bible, and they were kept there because the area is so dry that it was able to maintain the quality of that paper for a very, very long time. Okay, so anyway, I think we're all out of time. That is the four groups that I want you guys to talk about. How would you respond to all these foreign powers, right? Specifically the Greeks and the Romans. How would you respond? Would you be in a scene? Would you run away from society and be with a group of other people? Kind of just a happy group, right? You guys are making food, you're eating, you're living together, having fun, and that's it, right? But you're away from society. Or would you be a Sadducee? Would you compromise with Rome and try to gain power and try to gain money and do that kind of thing? Or would all these foreign powers make you mad? Would you be a zealot? Would you try to fight back and kill the Romans and kick them out? Or would you be a Pharisee, the most popular group at the time? Would you be a Pharisee and say, okay, I'm not about to go kill the Romans, but I want to make a stand against the Romans and emphasize my differentness as a Jewish person, and just be an ordinary person living within society, not agreeing with the Romans, but not fighting against the Romans. Okay? So those are the four groups. And I want you to choose one and stick to it and explain to me why you would be that one particular group. Okay? So we are all out of time. I'm sorry I went too long today, but we didn't have class yesterday, so I guess it's okay. But I want to just leave it open and say, do you guys have any questions for me? Are there any questions that you guys have about these four groups? I will, per Chi's request, take a picture of these notes that I took and post them. But again, the notes don't have all my explanations, so you're welcome to come back to YouTube and rewatch these, if you want to. Okay? But any questions at all? Is anybody still with me? Yep, 6 of you guys still with me. Has anybody got a question for me? All right, you're welcome. You're welcome. Can I post like this? What do you mean, like this? can I post like this? As I'm waiting for your reply, what exactly you're asking. When you post, what you want to do is you want to say, I would be a zealot because, and you give your reasons, right? Because, I think it's okay to kill people if we're defending ourselves, and we should kick the Romans out, whatever, blah, 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 right? Or you should say, I would be a Pharisee because I don't believe in violence, but I think these foreigners shouldn't be here controlling us, and I would like to emphasize my distinctiveness in terms of my own beliefs. All right. So I want 100 words. So what I just said was shorter than that. I want a detailed explanation as to why you would be exactly what you would be. Okay. And let me see. Here is the link. I'm not getting a link. Gee, I don't. I see your comment. Can I post like this? Here's the link, but I'm not getting a link. Let me see. Yeah, I'm not getting a link there. Maybe YouTube cut off the link. But, just if you can post early, so Chi, if you want to post today or tomorrow or Thursday, even, I mean, as long as it's not too late on Thursday, if you can post one of these days and it's not right, I'll just respond and I'll say, hey, you could fix this up a little bit like this, okay? So just respond however you like, right on Google Classroom. I'll read through it if it's early, and I'll check it out. And if it's good, you're gonna post right now. Okay, so I'm gonna quit this YouTube, and then I'm gonna go check out where you're gonna post on Google Classroom. And if you're good to go, it's on Google Classroom also. Awesome. So I'll check it out. If it's good, if you're good to go, I'll just give you credit for that right away. And if I want more, I'll tell you. Okay? Does that work? Already on. Okay, so I'll go check that out. I am not on Google Classroom because I only have one computer that I'm looking at right now, and my other device is doing the video. Okay, so does anybody else other than Chi have a question? I'm going to go ahead and end right here. Okay, and you guys are welcome to just do this on Google Classroom, and that's it. I am thinking we're not going to live stream tomorrow. I think this is going to be good enough. You guys tomorrow can just work on your post, and that's it. Okay. And I don't think we're going to live stream on Thursday too, because we're never going to live stream on Thursday, and I don't even know if we have class on Thursday. Thursdays is so weird. But we will live stream again on Friday. Okay. So this is probably going to be it for us. About twice a week, we'll live stream and talk about stuff, but I don't see us needing to talk every single day. So Tuesday, Friday is probably going to be a pretty good rhythm for us of when we're going to meet for class. If I run a little bit over, sorry about that. But I think it'll work best like this. We'll probably just live stream about twice a week, and everything else will be up on Google Classroom. All right. So blessings, everybody, guys. Stay safe. Stay at home. Do your work. Watch TV, whatever. But don't go out in public places. It's not a safe time. Stay safe, and God bless you all. All right. See ya.